Now we're going to have a look at the muscles of facial expression. As you can see here in our virtual dissection, we've removed all the skin and subcutaneous tissue and kind of created a little bit of an idealized version. Over to the left of it, you actually have this here. This is a real cadaveric dissection, and we can see if we can correlate the muscles on the virtual one with the real one as we move forward. Okay. So the muscles are in the subcutaneous tissue, yeah, and not only in the face and neck, but also in the anterior and posterior scalp. These will move the skin when the muscles contract, of course, and that will change our facial expressions. That'll convey our mood. It's very, very important because this is how we communicate with our outside world, and actually we do so way more than we might actually anticipate. Our facial expressions are very important. However, some people are bad at facial expressions, and some people might be good at facial expressions, but bad at reading facial expressions. Also, most of these muscles will attach to bone or fascia and produce their effects by then pulling on the skin. As we're going to go through this, I'm going to try to focus on muscles that you might encounter in a laboratory setting. All of the muscles of facial expression are innervated by the facial nerve. I guess that's kind of a no-brainer. That will be cranial nerve number 7. And as we're going to move through this lecture series, you're going to learn that the facial nerve is actually very interesting because it can do way more than just innervate a few muscles of facial expression. It also carries parasympathetics and special sensory fibers, for instance, for taste. Highlighted here is the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis. Yeah. Some books will refer to this muscle as the frontalis, but if we think about it, technically it should be called occipitofrontalis because you have the occipitalis back here, and then it is connected via the epicranial aponeurosis to the frontalis, so why don't we just call it occipitofrontalis? You have a muscle that is circling the eye that will be called the Orbicularis Oculi, and to be more precise, I would say we have the orbital part here, and the one that's on the eyelids is called the palpebral part because the palpebrae are the eyelids. Then you have the zygomaticus major muscle here. You have the zygomaticus minor. This is in lab often, well, destroyed or often not dissected out very cleanly. You have the Levator Labiae Superioris. Again, the name kind of indicates what it does. Levator, lift Labiae Superioris, upper lip, lifts up your upper lip, right? As if you're kind of creating a little bit of a sneering expression. Then we have the Levator Labiae Superioris Alaque nasi. That is kind of a mouthful, and in many labs this one's actually not dissected out, but if you are lucky and have someone who is skilled at this, you might be fortunate enough to see this in lab. You have a small muscle here directly across the bridge of the nose, the nasalis. The Orbicularis oris, as you can see, this is kind of like a sphincter around the mouth. And then you have a muscle that is often activated by people when they get their tests back and it's a bad exam grade, which would be the depressor anguili oris. And people with small kids like me, they will see that kids are very good at pulling the corners of their mouth down when they're upset at that, and luckily you can snap out of it quickly by activating the other muscles that will pull up on the corners of the mouth, like for instance the Levator Labiae Superioris and the zygomaticus major and minor. Then you have the depressor labiae inferioris down here, and directly on the chin, the mentalis. If you are curious about the functions of each of these muscles in detail, this is pretty straightforward. You probably already know how this works. You just click on the muscle of interest, and then you can activate a little tab that'll give you all the information that your heart desires. Like you can see here now, this is some more information about the mentalis. If you don't know how to pronounce it,
mentalis.
Mentalis. There you go. And here's all the information you want. Just click on the muscle and you can learn whatever you need to know. Let's have a look at the muscles of facial expression from a lateral perspective. We have the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis. This is the epicranial aponeurosis, which connects the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis and the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis. Alternatively, we can also just call them frontalis and occipitalis. That kind of makes just as much sense in my mind. We have muscles associated with the ear, so they're called auricular muscles. Here's your orbicularis oculi. The large ring part here is going to be the sphincter that helps pinch your eye closed. Okay, and in addition to that, you also have a smaller part, the one on the eyelids, which is the palpebral part. We have our zygomaticus major, and close by the zygomaticus minor, we have the buccinator or buccinator, however you would like to pronounce it. I've heard it either way. You have the sphincter around the mouth named Orbicularis oris, the depressor of the lower lip, depressor anguli oris, and the depressor of the angle of the mouth was that, and this is the depressor of the lower lip, the depressor labii inferioris. If we move this a little bit further over here, I can also see a muscle, which we're going to deal with actually in the next segment, but this large muscle here is the so-called masseter. And the large gland here is the large salivary gland that we have, which would be our parotid gland. If I rotate this a little bit like so, we can see here's going to be another gland. This would be your submandibular gland. Submandibular gland, parotid gland, masseter muscle. The innervation for the parotid gland actually stems from the glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve number 9. The course, how the fibers get to the gland, is quite interesting because the parasympathetic fibers will travel via branches of V3, via branches of the auriculotemporal nerve, to the parotid gland. The parasympathetic synapse will have occurred in a small ganglion named the otic ganglion. The other gland you can see down here, the submandibular gland, and there's another one called the sublingual gland, those will actually have innervation stemming from a different cranial nerve, which would be from cranial nerve number 7. In that case, fibers hitch a ride via a special little branch called the chorda tympani that then joins the lingual nerve, which is a branch of V3, and synapse in a ganglion called the submandibular ganglion. Here's something interesting about the buccinator muscle. The buccinator actually originates from a region called the pteriomandibular raphe, which is basically a fibrous line where two muscles meet edge to edge. In addition, it also originates from the alveolar process of the maxilla and mandible. The buccinator inserts into the lips, where it intermingles with the orbicularis oris muscle. The buccinator is an important muscle because without it, it would be hard to keep food between the occlusal surfaces of our teeth. Imagine you're like blowing air into your cheeks. You kind of make like big cheeks like Louis Armstrong, but you can also suck in your cheeks, right? Well, if we weren't able to push food from the our cheeks back into the occlusal surfaces or in the gap between our maxillary mandibular molars, we would have a lot of food just hanging around in the little vestibule, which is between your buccinator and the teeth and the gingiva on the inside of the mouth. Something very important to note, though, is that the buccinator is not a muscle of mastication, right? It is important in eating, but it's not a true muscle of mastication. Rather, it is counted as a muscle of facial expression, which is also used in smiling.